Working It Out, a podcast show about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces, our communities, and our lives. A show where we put diversity and inclusion to work.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.
Welcome to Working It Out. I'm your host, Dr. Vanessa Weaver. There's been a lot of discussion on the role of mental health and how it's impacting the workforce, particularly in this COVID pandemic era that we've been in. So we decided to devote a couple of shows to really exploring the impact of mental health on parents and employees. On this episode of Working It Out, we're going to look at the mental health and its impact on working parents. And I am so glad that we're going to be joined by Ms. Claudine Miles. She is the CEO and co-founder of Restore More. And it was launched in 2018, and it has a central mission, a dedication to continuing to explore wellness strategies nationwide to uplift communities of color. And that's really important because in study after study, they showed that there has been a significantly larger impact, mental health impact in communities of color as a result of COVID situation. And frankly, it was probably existing before then. And so we're going to talk to Ms. Miles, and I'm excited about her because she has received so many awards for the kind of innovative work that she's done in this whole area of mental health and wellness restoration for communities of color, and particularly those families in the communities. And in fact, in January 2021, she's an activist. In January 2021, she advocated and got 2 policies passed in the Atlanta public schools for restorative practices and dealing with trauma informed care. And I'm going to ask her to explain what does restorative process and trauma informed care mean. But frankly, she led the work, the effort to really focus on this for children and for families. And so she's going to talk about this, and she's going to talk about it from the lens of not only the professional that she is, but helping parents understand and think about how can they cope with these mental health challenges of their children and how it's showing up for them in their workplaces. So Claudine, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Weaver.
So tell me a little bit more about this Restore More. I think that is a fascinating name. Why did you choose that name? What does it stand for?
I have a firm belief that there are a lot of people in this world that are hurting due to some things that have happened in their past, whether it be their childhood or even their career, and healing is needed. And one of my unique gifts is being able to sit with people in pain, in trauma, listen deeply, and ultimately empower them to take steps to achieve the healing. And so this name came about 3 years ago when we launched this business. And I remember reaching out to a really small group of friends and sending them my top 5 names of this potential business. And this was the one that everyone immediately gravitated to. And what's really unique is that I thought it was really bold to go out and say, we're going to restore people. And I didn't know if it would be true. But what's beautiful is through this work, I've heard from countless people, whether they're parents or teachers or students, that we do, in fact, leave them feeling restored. And I think that's beautiful because we set out to do it, but I wasn't sure.
Well, congratulations on that. In just 3 years, you've accomplished a tremendous amount. Now, is Restore More just located in the Atlanta region, or how can some of our viewers who are all over the country connect with you?
Such a great question. We are physically located in Atlanta, but with the pandemic, everyone apparently got really well acquainted with Zoom, and we are all now Zoom experts. And so Zoom has allowed us to work throughout the country with countless schools and partners. And so it's as simple as heading to our website, werestoremore.com, scheduling a consultation, and we will figure out how to best accommodate your school or serve your parents, whether that's flying out and delivering an in-person session or meeting on Zoom where it's convenient.
Well, we're going to show some information so our viewers can connect with you. I guess we should say thank God for technology, because it allows people in different cities to connect with you and others. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about this important topic. And as you know, our show looks at diversity, equity, and inclusion issues and how they show up in the workplace for all kinds of diverse people. But we consider parents also a diversity cohort. And when we looked at the data, I have some great researchers on our team. And when we looked at the data, we found out that almost 1 out of every 2 parents have taken time off from work to deal with mental health issues of their children. I mean, that's a big number. That's 1 out of 2. Well, what else is the data telling you?
So many things, that they are overworked. And I think that statistic that you just shared kind of backs that up. They are so overworked that at times they feel like they need to step back or away from work to be better parents. They're stretched thin. They're trying to handle all the responsibilities of being a professional while ultimately raising like healthy and whole children. And a lot of times we're disconnected. And I think that's one of the most important ones, because connection goes hand in hand with wellness. But the way our society currently functions, we go to work, we come home, we parent the kids, and we might see people on social media, but there has been this removal of connection because of COVID. And parents desperately need that, especially now.
Well, it's interesting because in many ways, COVID forced more connection in terms of being in the same place, right? Without warning, parents were forced to figure out how they could participate in schooling their children virtually, right? And many parents, and I mean, I'm a parent, but I'm like a grandparent now. But many parents have said, I don't know how to teach math, this new math or English, or I have all of these work demands, and now I have to figure out how do I deal with just teaching my kids all day. And just that, we've heard from so many of our corporate partners of the trauma that many parents felt with this just change in the whole educational training system. And on top of that, over the last few weeks, I guess over the last really couple of months, there has been a lot in the news about the impact of COVID on the mental health status of families and children. And in fact, some of the studies indicate that I saw a report last week that there has been in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, what they call a DMV, 129% increase in the number of children that do some kind of self-injury of themselves. I'm not saying suicide, but something that they do to injure themselves, either cutting or, creating some kind of harm for themselves. And can you imagine the stress and the fear that placing parents as they're trying to deal with this experience that their children are showing, and that has kind of ballooned since COVID. They're trying to deal with that and still look like they got it together in the workplace. So Ms. Miles, tell me, what are the type of mental health conditions that children are showing now since COVID?
I think that's a really important question to talk about, because while youth mental health was a really important topic pre-COVID, to your point and to that statistic, nationally, the challenge has just exploded. It's really not just in the DMV. We're seeing this across the country, where students have reported that mental health challenges are increasing. They are struggling even more so now with connectedness with their peers after being physically out of school. For some students being a year, some students being 2, having trouble connecting with peers when they head back to school. We've seen more incidents of self-harm, to your point, whether that is actual attempted suicide or things like cutting or pills, or even ingesting chemicals with the desire to inflict self-harm. And we're also seeing record numbers of children actually reporting struggles with anxiety, depression, and diagnosable mental health conditions, which has exploded since March of 2022.
And my good, as you talked about that, as you know, I'm a clinical psychologist, and so I'm just like feeling, wow, that is really a significant change and shift. So how are parents reacting to that? I mean, if I was, say, an employer and I had a person who worked with on my team or worked with us, and their children were having these kind of issues, what are ways that parents are trying to cope with that?
So I think, in the beginning of the pandemic, parents were just trying to do the best that they could. They suddenly became teachers, unbeknownst to themselves, and had to maintain these like rigorous school schedules at home and involve themselves in lessons. And I feel like that was very overwhelming for parents who have taken a supportive approach, but still not, I have one foot in the classroom approach in the way COVID kind of forced us to. But what I've seen is parents are grappling. They don't always know what the signs of concern are. They don't always know what to do when they do see those signs and how to get help. And what I think is interesting is there isn't always seemingly a safe space to discuss these things. For example, my child is having suicidal ideations. They're telling me that they want to harm themselves, or my child is sounding hopeless. We hear from a lot of parents, again, around the country that are just saying, this is what I'm hearing. I don't even know what to do with that, because in my generation, mental health wasn't something that was a priority, nor was it as accessible. So parents are scared, understandably, but they're also going through this learning curve where they're trying to figure out, what does it look like to support youth mental health? And our kids are going through something uniquely different that even we or generations that precede me, we didn't experience. We didn't have the gift of social media, watching and critiquing our every move as teens. And I'm grateful.
And it's interesting because one of the typical norms was that you never really talked about mental health challenges in the workplace because it made you feel, or made some people concerned, and made them seem weak or not on top of their jobs. And so it's been oftentimes a discomfort to deal with mental health issues and illness, for individuals who had it themselves. We're not even talking about their children. Now they're forced to have to deal with these real visible signs of our children having struggles and challenges impacting their mental health. And so what are employers doing to encourage their employees to be more open and to seek help?
I think the best ones and some best practices are making space to talk about this. This is not the type of thing that you can expect employees to talk about on their own. Because again, to your point, societally, it's been deemed as taboo. And in the workplace, it can feel as if I acknowledge that I have anxiety, if I acknowledge that I've been depressed, or that I even had a hospitalization in my past, is that going to be used against me?
Yeah.
Is that going to be turned and spinned as to why I'm not capable to do this job? When in reality, what employers know is that majority of their workforces have had some experience with mental health support. And I think we've just got to normalize that mental health is just as important as physical health. Like, it's not strange if I were to ask the room, who's had a physical in the last year? But we make it so abnormal to say, who's seen a therapist in the last year? And so some of the best organizations that are leading in this space are actually normalizing these conversations. I think about an amazing Fortune 500 bank that we worked with in April of 2020, who reached out to us and said, hey, our parents are struggling. They don't know how to respond to suddenly being teachers. They're seeing these huge emotional shifts in their kids. They don't know how to support. Can you come in and do a 90-minute workshop for us on not only their mental health, but how to support their kids' mental health? And through that, we provided a lot of love and resources for parents, but then also if these are the things you're seeing with kids, this is normal. This is reason for concern. Here are the next steps. So we really try to ensure that we make things practical and digestible. And I think the best organizations are finding work like ours to make it, again, easy. Because again, if you don't have a skill set to take away the shame of these types of conversations, when your boss is telling you, hey, let me know about your mental health issues, that doesn't necessarily create a safe space. Right. So sometimes you need to bring in that outside provider to offer that. And one other thing that I've seen organizations do really well in the last 2 years is reiterate and clarify and even potentially adjust their employee assistance programs from a mental health perspective. So educators who I largely spend a lot of time with, they are constantly being reminded and updated about, hey, you have access to mental health services. You get 5 free therapy sessions every year. Please take advantage of them. Here's how you do it. So rather than just kind of leaving that as something that was in a contract that was getting dusty, I am seeing organizations take the lead and normalize saying, you have these therapy sessions, please use them, and actually check in on people to see, how's your heart doing? Not just how's the work going.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, you talked about these sessions that your firm, Restore, did for this bank. How did the employees respond to it?
You know, it was so interesting. What we find, particularly when we work with large organizations like this one, they're so perplexed because they've never had anything like it. They haven't had a safe space to acknowledge, whew, parenting is hard and I feel like I'm failing. They haven't had a safe space to say, whew, I really struggled with burnout and it increased my depressive symptoms. They haven't had an opportunity to share space with other parents and just be brutally honest about how taxing it is. And the way we do that is, if we're meeting in Zoom, we're actually allowing and creating these unique opportunities where folks can go into breakout spaces, and we're giving them a question prompt and they're able to just unrestrictedly be themselves and be honest. And there isn't enough safe spaces like that, particularly in the workplace. And in that, people are continuing to say, I feel heard, I feel seen, I feel validated, I have a couple of strategies, and I feel restored. And I think, to me, it's not us that does that. It's what happens when you bring a collective group together and just channel the energy towards something productive and constructive to those individuals. So because we treat it with such care as we're building that content, their hearts and their experience is always deeply connected to everything that I build. So because we center them, I think those experiences are pretty unique.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, because a lot of times as we work with companies and organizations, some people will say that's really outside the boundary of work. And what is providing this type of employee support have to do with increasing our bottom line? But we know the statistics show that companies that are responsive to the kind of needs of parents and other people who are having mental health challenges in the workforce, in fact, develop a much more engaged organization. And they have improvement in safety. They have significant improvements in productivity. They have improvements in employees who want to stay with the organization. And with this big wave where people are leaving organizations in droves, that is particularly important around how do you retain the talent in your organizations. Have you seen that impact in the companies that you're working with?
Drastically. For us, again, our target clients are generally schools, right? But if there's a parent network that you support, we want to be able to offer those skills to parents. And one of the things we try to really harp on is our data management. And so we're assessing where parents come in at the beginning of the work with us and then how they feel after. And what we're seeing is staff is acknowledging, I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel valued. A company that actually cares about my well-being and how my parenthood either supports or pulls away from my well-being, that sends a message beyond anything you could ever put in an email about the value of an employee, right? Because I don't care about just you, I care about the whole person behind you. And one of the things that's so key here is happy, healthy, whole adults lead to better outcomes for any organization, right? I'm going to be more productive if I'm happy, healthy, and whole. I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to be more innovative. And when we put these things on the back burner, to your point, we get a lot of burnout. We see a lot of staff turnover, and the cost of staff turnover for any executive or founder is the highest cost there is.
That's tremendous. I mean,
finding quality talent is hard, especially now. So when you have great talent, what are you doing to support the needs, even if you believe they might be outside of the scope of the work? Because I would urge you to reconsider and understand that while we want people to check things at the door, that's a lovely expression that I've heard in the professional spaces, right? Check your emotions at the door. The reality is most humans still carry them into the workplace.
Correct. And in fact, it's interesting because in some additional research, this millennial work group, the group that is now the largest population, these are folks pretty much under 30, under 33 in the workplace, they have a lot more comfort in talking about issues of mental health, their own mental health or the mental health issues that their children are experiencing. And they have an expectation that organizations respond to it. And so that, we talk about this, what is the impact of the different generations in our workforce? That's been one of the most positive impacts that I've seen the millennials. I mean, they brought many, but this is a particularly positive impact in terms of shifting and changing that taboo. And I think that's the term you use, that taboo culture we have around mental health.
I love that. I'm sorry. I'm on the tail end of the millennials. I'm like one of probably the first groups but I am 36. And I think, to your point, personal happiness, community impact, commitment to a cause, those are values that are really high on many barometers of millennials. And so from an organizational standpoint, if you are not speaking to those things, highlighting those things, you might miss out on an entire amazing group of professionals that can innovate in a really unique way. So,
yeah. And also, if in not speaking up, sometimes you make assumptions about the kind of conversations you can or cannot have with your immediate supervisor.
If you're an employer of folks, a really simple way to kind of open this dialogue that's kind of nifty is this method called rose, bud, and thorn. And essentially, you let staff know that you really want to do a wellness check and see how they're doing. And so the next time you meet with them, you're going to ask them personally, what is a rose or a bloom? What's a positive area in your personal life that is just sprouting and it makes you smile? What is a bud? What's something that's maybe growing in your personal life? It's kind of uncomfortable. It's not really enjoyable, but it's going to lead to something good in the end. And then what's a thorn? What's something that is sticking you in the side, making it hard for you to sleep at night and really troubling? And I think if employers just took 5 to 10 minutes with their employees, or if there are several employees asking their managers to have those questions with employees, I know it will do a world of good. I recently had that same conversation with my employees who I'm very close with, but even still learned a lot about how I can better support them. So I want to share that for the leaders.
Well, thank you, because I want to steal that technique, and it's called rose, bud, and thorn.
You got it.
Okay. Now, do you have that? Would an employer have that with, or a boss have it with an individual person or with a team?
Yeah, I think it's an individual conversation based on what you want to hear, right? Now, you could have it with the team. If there's like a sales department, you could say, professionally, tell me the rose, bud, and thorn. But if the idea or the end goal is to connect deeply, efficiently with staff to get a pulse on their wellness, this is a great way to do it. And so it looks like a 5 to 10 minute conversation with your staff. And again, if your staff is large, you may need to speak to your managing team about it and then have them have those conversations with the necessary employees. But organizations just don't do it enough, and we need to do it more. But if I'm an employee and I need to have a conversation with my boss around wellness, I think it's really important to first spend some time with self and identify what you want to communicate. You ever go into a conversation wanting A, and then you communicate B, and you finish the conversation and you're scratching your head like, that's not what I wanted. Now I have extra work. Wait a minute. So we want to bullet point out what we want to get across, right? What's the root of the problem? What's the potential solution that you're looking for? You want to already go in having a potential solution, because leaders appreciate potential solutions. They get constant bombardment with problems. So if you come with a solution that is advantageous for you, that also is mutually beneficial for the leader, because they don't have to solve it. And it also works for you, right? And then 3, you'll want to, once you are clear on this is what I want, these are my talking points, you want to practice it with somebody, because we all get in that moment and we get nervous and we flub up our words. Go to a friend, go to a colleague, go to a partner and say, can I just practice this crucial conversation with you? We don't even want to call it difficult. It's crucial. It's very important that I do it. And then we want to execute. We want to reach out to the individual and name our intention. There is nothing worse than someone saying, hey, can I meet with you? But never telling you why. Because you know what our brains do? They think about all the bad things that it could be. And so by naming for your manager, hey, I want to speak with you about an issue that I'm having in regards to blank.
Yeah.
Do you have any time next week? Make it easy, but give them some insight.
Well, I'm so glad you shared that, because I too believe it is the responsibility of the manager to really understand what's going on with each and every person that reports to her or him. I really do think that. I mean, that's a personal belief that I have. But I also know in reality that doesn't happen. And most of the time it doesn't happen. So the employee making sure that they're taking care of themselves and putting out what we call understanding what is your ask. What is the ask? Is so critical as a way of empowering yourself to make sure that you get what you need. So I really, really appreciate you sharing those tips with us. Well, I must tell you, Ms. Miles, Claudine, that our time is up, and it was a fabulous conversation that you had with us today. And you offered so many practical tips that any one of us can apply and use in our own personal lives. So I wanted to thank you on behalf of our Working It Out team for being part of this conversation today. And this is a real diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion, because it's impacting a significant part of our workforce.
If any parents are listening to this and they're thinking, we might need some of these workshops, know that we are super accessible. You can find us at our website at werestoremore.com. And we do things like talk about the dangers of social media. We do things like talk about suicide prevention and risks for suicide, because the more we know, the better we can do. So know that we have the tools. We want to break them down and make them easy for you all. And we are here. So
I am Dr. Vanessa Weaver, your host of Working It Out. And on behalf of our team, we wish you a safe, productive, and what we say, a be happy week. Goodbye.
Working It Out is brought to you by Alignment Strategies, a management consultancy with more than 3 decades of experience in diversity, equity and inclusion, and organizational development. To learn more, visit alignmentstrategies.com.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.